Hi, and welcome to The Curling Show, the podcast that brings you interviews with the sport's top athletes and the people who shape the game. I'm Dean Gemmel, and this is the second half of a two-part interview with George Karrys of the Curling News. Let's talk about TV coverage. You're an experienced sports television production guy, and my question to you is one that comes from my own inexperience in this area, but why can't the network show action from more than one game more often during events? Tell me what prevents. I know there might be cost issues, but they seem to be able to flip over and show shots. I always wonder why we don't see more of showing 2 or 3 games at once.
Yeah, there is a cost issue, and I think it's directly related to the manpower. Believe it or not, there is a really super talented human being behind each and every great camera angle you see. It's not all just the overheads that tilt up and down, which are the bread and butter of curling, and also Curl TV uses that quite well. Curl TV really just has one guy, apart from the overhead cameras, who shows the deliveries and then skip reaction and whatnot at the other end. But, you look at a TSN or a CBC, they've got 5 or 6 cameras going for a game they're featuring, and every one of the humans behind that camera is brilliant and has been a contractor in the sport of curling for so many years. Same goes for the Sportsnet guys up in Canada, by the way. And these guys know their stuff. You need to get at least 3 or 4 guys. Even if you crunch it and drop the desired number of cameras down to something more manageable for cost, you've still got more people needed on a crew to cover 4 sheets of curling.
Right.
And it's just going to add up too much. And curling is already on a razor-thin margin of somewhere between breaking even and making money. And sometimes it loses money, which is some of the more public furor we heard last year over the Ford Worlds in Victoria, or a year ago now, of course. So I think, that's a long answer to a pretty simple question. I do think it's cost factor, but, and for every great cameraman, or 2 or 3, there's a production assistant and a new assistant director, and then a director for each sheet. In Italy, we had to cover all 4 sheets for TOBO, which was the Torino Olympic Broadcasting Organ. This was the overall world feed organization that distributed all TV pictures from every game that was televised, and every game was, to over 200 nations around the world. And, I was a part of that crew, and there were a lot of us. You basically had the cream of the crop at that competition. It was like 160 people on our crew to cover 4 or 5 sheets. I forget how many it was. I think it was 5. That's huge.
Right. Well, that makes sense to me. I realize that there's camera people involved, and I guess it really is a people cost, and every camera comes with more than one person. So that does make sense to me. Just always something I wish, when you go into a curling club, you end up watching 6 games at once, and it'd be nice on television to be able to do that, but that makes sense.
I know, and I hear you. I think we're heading in a direction where things like this can be addressed, but it's not just the people, obviously. There's equipment. You head out back of the Tobo gig in Pinerolo for the curling venue, and there's 4 trucks right there, 1 for each sheet. As we all know, they take 1 truck to a curling event now. Imagine if you have to take 4 or 5 to every single event, weekend after weekend.
Hey, let's touch quickly on every Canadian curler's favorite organization, the CCA. Definitely a rocky year for them, and I know you'll want to be politically correct here, but what do you think they have to do to improve their standing with curlers in Canada?
I think they need a communications plan, to be totally honest with you. And, they need, if you will, a White House press secretary. They need someone other than Warren Hansen, who's extremely tied up in the management of the events, and who does a pretty good job, I think. But, with all the speculation that runs rampant, whether it's online or in person, what we saw, going back a year ago now, or just about a year ago over the original TV finagle, was unbelievable. It was all there in black and white during last year's championships. You remember how it started with the Scott Tournament of Hearts in Newfoundland. Everything that was going on was right there in the public eye and could be digested through the media. Some of those things should have been buried, or there should have been some kind of spin doctoring. So I think they need some blatant communications work. I think they need a PR agency. I think they need a figurehead or a face who's willing to talk curling at any time, at any moment with the media, and not run and hide. And if it's bad news, make your decision. If you talk about the bad news or you spin it differently, but get your news out there, get your information out there. Keep your clients, the curlers of Canada, informed.
And they seem to forget the perception is reality, and they seem to forget that at some level they're almost like a political organization, like you say, where, and if you see Warren Hansen flying in first class, it annoys you if you're a club curler, to be honest. So I think they have to remember that some of these perception issues, turn into reality, and I don't think they have any kind of ulterior agenda, but that's what people start to think. And I hope they pull things together up there, because I really think that, for curling to grow, as much as we need growth outside of Canada, it has to be really strong in Canada. And I think that's why the CCA is such an important organization, whether you're in Canada or not.
There's a few things the CCA has done in the past in a macro sense that I think have really hurt them. They were the last to hop on board the concept of the players being a part of the show. They've always talked about, you remember the height of the big CCA versus the WCPA finagle, and when the Grand Slams first came out back in 2001, and it was us against them and all that, they never put stock in their athletes as real members of the team. And I'm talking about the whole marketing machine of the CCA and the event management and the Briar and stuff like that. It took so long, someone like Paul Boutillier, the head of WCPA, to make inroads with the CCA and make them realize that, hey, we can work with players. We can market their image in their face without making them feel ripped off about it. We can support them in any of their sponsorship efforts that they want to undertake. So they were the last in line. And I always felt, and I was quite blunt about that when I would talk to the CCA, that was unforgivable because they went through all this crap in 1994-95 when Russ Howard and a bunch of others, I think it was 21 curlers, essentially launched a legal action against the CCA for restraint of trade, the inability for them to wear their own sponsor logos on ice of the Briar, while other sports like golf had no sponsor conflicts whatsoever. So that's the first thing they did. Another thing is that, and it pains me to say it, curlers are expert whiners and complainers. And I know this firsthand, having been involved in this industry for over 25 years. And knowing that, and the CCA should know that, they've got to make extra efforts to communicate to this very fickle public that has so many things to say about TV coverage. And I mean, take a look at the sport of curling. I talked about the players just a minute ago. The nature of our sport is that curlers govern themselves on the ice. And of course you have to have officials now at major events. But the reality is there's no team owners. There's no one forcing players to wear suits and ties on a plane as they go spiel to spiel. These teams can hire and fire their own. We're not like other Olympic sport. We're very different. So from the player level right up through, there's an independence in the curling mind for our sport. And that means people are more apt to speak their mind and to be rather bold about what they think of their association and anything to do with the sport. So the CCA needs to recognize that. So you have to now cater to a more fickle market, and some positive communications will help you in that regard. The last thing about the CCA, and again communications, is that there are good things that the CCA does on the development side, such as giving over $100,000 every year or hundreds of thousands of dollars through a grant program to curling clubs, aging curling clubs that are losing their pipes and their buildings are falling down around them. But nobody knows about that, because if you don't have adept communications, people are going to focus, particularly in a fickle market, on the negative. So it's all negative all the time for the CCA.
Do you think with the World Curling Players Association and that whole schmozzle, as we want to call it or whatever, from a few years back, then the CCA started into ventures like the Canada Cup and even the Continental Cup. Do you think at some point maybe they've lost a sense of the grassroots too, though? I mean, you look at events like the mixed and the juniors that have sort of receded a little bit. Do you think they need to put some more focus back in there?
Yeah, I think they do. That's kind of a tricky question, because the reality is that the big events are what drives all the revenue coming into the CCA, which in turn they would say gives them the chance to do development grassroots programs and create more coaches and rebuild curling clubs and eventually come around the other end, back to where we started, and get other events on television like the mixed and the seniors. But it is all so much based around the Briar and so little based around events, other worthy events like the Scott Tournament of Hearts and even these new events, the Canada Cups and all that. I mean, so much money for the CCA's coffers is earned through one event, one 10-day event at the Briar every year. And that's why the model is so fragile. That's why it can fall apart like a deck of cards at any moment, at least from my perspective. That's a really tricky question. I mean, they have to focus on revenues, and particularly the TV angle of the event side of those revenues, in order to do anything they want to do under their mandate.
You make a good point about the Briar. I think they really have to be careful with that franchise right now, too, because I think the success of the Olympic trials in some ways makes it a trickier thing to make the Briar a big focal point.
Yeah, it would be nice to see the trials continue to grow and be not only a self-sustaining event, but an event that can help the overall coffers of Canadian curling. But that's only every 4 years, right? I'd love to see it grow even bigger and better than it has, and I know it will be for 4 years from now, just because we are hosting the next Olympic Winter Games, regardless of where the trials are going to be held.
We end our interviews with the run back, George. That's where I give you a topic, and you give me your thoughts on it in 1 to 3 words.
Okay.
All right. Possibility of another athlete calendar next season.
Strong.
Chance of curlers from North America appearing in it.
Very strong.
Wow. Stephen Harper's first 75 days.
Really good.
Best new team rumor you've heard.
Oh, I can't say.
Oh, kill me.
We're 24 hours away from revealing it.
Oh, well, I'm not a scoop show anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
Okay,
I'll catch up on it later.
Okay.
Hey, thanks for your time, George. Have a good time up in Thunder Bay at the Heart to Heart. And if anyone is listening and they don't have a subscription to the Curling News, please get off the stick and go to thecurlingnews.com. Is that right, thecurlingnews.com?
That's right. We've had some server problems with those Curling Zone boys over the last week or so, but I hope it's up and running now. You can certainly go to the calendar page, though, curlingnews.com/calendar.html.
And hey, keep up the great work with the Curling News. I think it's a great paper for the sport. Keep up the great work with curlnews.blogspot.com, with the calendars, and with collaboration on projects like Curling Zone's Black Book of Curling. Thanks, George.
Thank you, Dean. All the best to you, and another great effort in the sport of curling, The Curling Show.
Thanks. Bye-bye. That was part 2 of our interview with George Karrys, and yes, that team rumor he couldn't discuss at the time of our phone call was the Martin-Morris merger. Our next show will feature a conversation with Randy Ferbey. Who knows what he'll tell us? Thanks for listening. Time for some more of that loud and tasty black pudding.